Hi, my name is David Thorne, and welcome to episode 21 of the AI for Churches podcast. In this episode, Bart and I start off by chatting through the ethics of AI image generation, and later, I interviewed a creative arts pastor named Brad Zimmerman, and we discuss his journey into using AI.
Welcome to the AI for Churches podcast. Our goal is to equip pastors and church leaders with resources related to artificial intelligence, helpful for sermon prep, creative ministries, outreach, and more. We do this by providing exclusive insights from AI experts, church leaders, and innovators actively leveraging AI to amplify the gospel and reach more people for Jesus Christ. Here are your hosts, Bart Blair and Dr. David Thorne.
Welcome to another episode of the AI for Churches podcast. Bart Blair here, joined by David Thorne. David, how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. It's another great week, and happy to be here.
It is another great day to talk about artificial intelligence and the local church. Excited about what we're going to be getting into today. We have some stuff that we're going to share together, which directly relates to the topic that we're going to be talking about today. Why don't you set the stage for our conversation?
Yeah, so for our conversation later in this episode, I'm going to be interviewing a guy named Brad Zimmerman, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But before that, I want to share something that happened to me on Twitter this past week. And what happened was, or not Twitter, on TikTok. So I shared this video on TikTok about some new AI image generators that have come out. And one of them is Grok 2, which is one that doesn't have a lot of barriers and guardrails on it. So people are creating all kinds of crazy images. And I mentioned on TikTok that we as church leaders need to consider and think through what is the appropriate use of a platform like this. And I started getting multiple comments, people writing back saying, why? We shouldn't have boundaries. They're the public figures. Who cares? Why are you asking about this? It's inevitable. There's nothing we can do. You just have to roll with it. All these comments, and I'm like, I don't know that that's true. And it got me thinking, where is the line of what is appropriate or ethical and what is not appropriate and unethical when it comes to these AI image generators, when they can create anything and it looks very real and you can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not.
It's very interesting. Obviously, your interview with Brad Zimmerman, which we're going to get to here shortly, is primarily on the topic of photo or image generation. And when we've set the table with AI use for churches in the past, and we've talked about the difference between AI assistance and AI generation. And when we use a lot of the LLMs, when we're using ChatGPT or Claude to help us write content, I think it's pretty clear where the line is as it relates to AI assisted content versus AI generated content. And clearly, when we start dabbling in image generation, we're talking about full on AI generated. This is not AI assisted content. This is like, I started with a blank slate, put an idea into the prompt, and I get a result that really has nothing to do with my own creativity and my efforts, right? Like it has nothing to do with my skill set. So it is interesting that you had that experience. I have been perfectly honest most of the time when I talk to people about AI image generation is probably the thing I've spent the least amount of time playing around in, because I find it to be the most cumbersome and the most challenging, right? I've only tried to use AI image generation when I have a very specific use that I'm trying to come up with. And in church-related stuff, it might be images for a blog post that I'm writing for my website, or for an illustration in my sermon, or something of that nature. You've spent a lot of time engaged with some of these tools, just trying to break the limits of creativity on some of them. But let me ask you some questions, David. Like, when we start talking about the lines that are drawn and try to put things in context, like what you're saying is, or I guess the question you're posing is, what are the ethics here? Do we have to have an ethics sort of framework for using AI image generation?
Yeah, and I'll just comment that I use it in a very similar way, where I've been writing talks, and actually the AI image generation becomes a part of my thinking process. Like I'm thinking of a point I want to make, and then I click over to an AI image generator and put in some words to try to see that idea out in person, and then might copy that into my presentation or blog post, same kind of thing. And it actually, what I like about it, so on the positive side for church leaders, is it actually can become an extension of your thinking and creative writing process, because you're working on what that looks like, feels like as you're writing. That's the positive side. But there's a line where we have to figure out, like what is appropriate, because we clearly know things like murder is wrong. Okay, so don't murder people. But like, if I raised my voice in an appropriate situation to a person who is aggressively coming towards me with a raised candlestick, that's probably an appropriate time to say, please put down the candlestick and do not approach me in such an aggressive manner, and then walk away. So there's a line.
Okay. Well, let's talk through some scenarios and some possible things that people might be using this AI generation for. I'm a pastor. I'm preaching through the book of Exodus, and I want an image of Moses parting the Red Sea that I want to use while I'm preaching in my PowerPoint or my media on Sunday. I use an AI tool, whether that's one of the ones that you're going to talk to Brad Zimmerman about, or just Shutterstock. I've used the Shutterstock AI image generation thing a few times. Am I wrong in creating an image of Moses, a person who lived thousands of years ago, of whom we have no photos? Like there are no photos of Moses as far as we know. So I have to create this image. Am I doing something wrong when I do that?
Do you have the ability to reach out to the Moses estate to ask for their approval of? I'm just joking.
No.
Yeah, it's one of those things where that seems there's no copyrights on an image of Moses, because no copyrighted images nor any images, official images, exist. So anything we write is pure creativity. So 100%, there is no issues in recreating images of any biblical character whatsoever, unless you are having them do something that is deemed unethical, in which point that is on you, and if you should consider whether that is appropriate or not.
Okay, all right. Although I could create an image of Moses murdering a man, and even though Moses is doing something unethical, because he actually did do that, right? So it's biblically accurate. Okay, well, how about this?
That's what happens when you bring another Bible scholar on the phone. You start whipping out those biblical nuances of, well, he actually did murder a man. So yeah. Thank you, Bart.
Let me give you another scenario. I'm preaching a sermon, and I want to use a real life person or real figure as an illustration. And I actually did this not too long ago. I used an illustration from the actor Shia LaBeouf. And if I wanted to create an image using AI and use that image of Shia LaBeouf in my PowerPoint or my media on Sunday morning, where's the line there? Am I doing something that I shouldn't be doing? I stumped you, didn't I?
Well, I know, because here's the thing. There are plenty of public pictures of people, and if we're sharing an image that we create of them just standing there, there's nothing bad. There's no ill intent. It's just a person that we're just trying to make a point of. But if there's a legal expert in this call right now, and we ask them that question, that legal person is probably going to say, no, you probably shouldn't do that. Right. But I've done it in Facebook posts myself. That's one time I was trying to create a Facebook post, and I wanted to say something about how Lionel Messi, the soccer player, is awesome, and Taylor Swift is awesome. So I tried to create an image of Taylor Swift and Lionel Messi in a soccer uniform. And it wasn't super hyper realistic because it was like 7 months ago. So things have changed drastically since then. It was clearly AI generated and it wasn't perfect. And I felt no issue with doing that. But I would at least give a second thought to it. And you might have to ask me again in 6 months.
Okay. Now, if your purpose for creating that content is just a fun, personal social media post, I think that's different than using that image for some sort of professional purposes. And I think the question is what we do in the church, especially as it relates to our teaching and our preaching and things like that on a Sunday morning, would we consider that to be professional purposes? So that's to me where we have to sort of ask ourselves the question about whether or not what we're doing is crossing some sort of line. Like, for example, I know a lot of pastors that when they're using images in their messages on Sunday, they will literally just go to Google Photos and grab a photo and reuse that photo. Technically, that's probably violating a copyright law, right? Yeah. You shouldn't be doing that. You should probably be using images off of some sort of
Getty Images
or Shutterstock or Envato or something where it's licensed. You're licensing the image to use it. You're not licensing the image of the celebrity when you create an image of a celebrity. You're using their likeness. You're using their likeness without their permission. And therefore, in the context of the church space, you probably shouldn't do it. Even though we're not doing what we're doing for profit. Now, what about parody law? Like what you did with Messi and Swift is really parody. And under parody law, and I'm not an expert in the law. Did I say that? I'll say it again. I am not an expert in the law. This podcast is not intended to give you any legal advice whatsoever. We probably should have said that at the very beginning. Maybe when we record your intro, you should say that we're not giving any legal advice. But under parody law, you're allowed to actually parody things. Like I used in a sermon series one time, the UFC logo, because I was doing a sermon series called Ultimate Family Challenges. And I had people actually push back on me about using the UFC logo because I was violating copyright. Actually, under parody law with what I did, and I did my research, I was allowed to use the UFC logo in this particular sermon series design and graphic because I wasn't representing that I was affiliated with the UFC and we were not using any UFC copyrighted content. So under parody law, I was allowed to parody that. Now, there was no individual. I wasn't using any people or celebrities or likenesses of an individual. Had I been using a likeness of an individual, maybe I'm walking a finer line there. I'm not really sure what the line on that is.
And what I love about your point is, and I hope we keep saying this in all of our episodes, rules that apply to AI apply to everything. So instead of pinpointing only AI, we have to ask the question, what else does that apply to? And copyrighted images, names, logos in AI, the same thing applies everywhere. So if a pastor is comfortable using a image that they just snip off of Google, then creating an AI image of that person is the same thing, but it just goes to the heart of the question. Is that even appropriate? So I love that you brought that up, Bart, because it reminds us of the bigger question. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the truth is you and I could go round and round on this and probably never really land the plane because we're not experts. And I think, the further from the center you get, the murkier things seem to be in terms of what the rules and what the laws are. And I'm sure over time, they're going to become a lot more explicit. We're recording this in the middle of a political election season. And more often on Twitter and on YouTube and other social platforms that I tend to scroll through from time to time, I'm seeing more AI generated images of the presidential candidates. And it's obvious. Now it's obvious that they are AI generated. And so, because it's obvious that they're AI generated in this particular season, maybe that's okay. Although I have seen some AI generated video of these particular political candidates who it's clearly AI, and well, it's clearly AI because what they're saying is so preposterous, but is it really? And I'm like, I'm not falling for it, but maybe there is someone out there falling for it. It is a little bit, it is a little tricky. It is a little dicey. Hey, before we throw things over to the interview, I did have, speaking of image generation, I have a new tool that I've been playing around with that I wanted to share with our audience. Is now a good time for me to do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's actually very simple. It's a background remover, and it is called Remove BG, and you can find it at remove.bg. Now, we're talking about image generation. This is great because it actually takes an image that you already have, and it very quickly removes the background. Now, you can do the same thing in Canva, and obviously, I bet a lot of our listeners or viewers on the YouTube channel use Canva. What's cool is I find it's very quick. If that's all you really need to do with the image, you can just pop it up. It removes the background. It's very, very accurate in what it does. Man, thinking back to a couple of years ago when I was trying to remove backgrounds in Photoshop and the painstaking process, that's a skill that many of us learned that is completely irrelevant today. We no longer need that skill. But Remove BG removes the background instantaneously. And you can connect your Remove BG account to your Canva account so you can remove the background and then you can actually create graphics in your Canva account with it. So might be worth trying out. There's a free version and a paid version. The free version will give you low resolution versions of the image, and the paid version, obviously, higher resolution. But you're going to have a conversation here with Brad about image generation. Why don't you set that up and then we'll kick things off?
Yeah, Brad's a really great guy, and he's done a lot of just learning about AI image generation. I really talked to him because he's a creative arts director at a church, and I really talk about how did you get into all this? How did you get into AI stuff? And he shares a lot of just really amazing practical tools that he uses on a weekly basis. So I can't wait for you guys to hear that because it's really helpful. We'll definitely share those in our show notes. If you're listening to this on your phone or in your car, definitely go back and try to find the show notes so you can find those, the list of those helpful websites. So yeah, here's my interview with Brad Zimmerman. Hi, everyone. I'm here with Brad Zimmerman, who's a creative director at Watermark Church up in Michigan. I'm in Cleveland. He's in Michigan. And if you're from anywhere else in the country, you might know that sometimes our states are not always the best of friends.
Yes.
And especially when it comes to like sports and football, college football especially. Brad, I didn't mention this, but I was in Michigan over Christmas when Ohio State played Michigan. Yeah. And it was Thanksgiving, whenever it was, I forget, but it was bad, but it was not a good day for Ohio State. Right. And we drove home that day. And so we just drove home, and there's just this caravan of cars. We had to drive past Ann Arbor, and there were so many cars, and they were all celebrating, and it was very
You guys
sad.
just hid your license plate and hoped for the best, right?
Yeah. I mean, we stopped at a rest area, and half the people were sulking and the other was celebrating. Yep. And we were part of the sulking crowd. So, but anyways, hey, this is what the church is all about. This is the gospel.
Yeah, coming together from divided sides for one main purpose and one goal.
We are diverse. I am the left hand, you are the right hand, but together we are the body of Christ. So yeah, thanks for being on the podcast. And I was thinking, I've heard your name multiple times in multiple places, and I want to invite you on. And I was really interested in your background and that you work for a church right now. So I would love, could you tell us just what you do? And let's just start there. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So If we haven't met before, my name's Brad, and a lot of people know me as that ProPresenter guy because I do all of the official training materials for ProPresenter that most churches use to project lyrics and videos and stuff like that. But I work in a local church in West Michigan called Watermark, and I'm the creative director, which, if you work at a smaller, medium-sized church, you might get the opportunity to give yourself a title. And so I was able to give myself a title. And so I chose creative director, but it really encompasses all of production, all of creative stuff. At one point, I was doing middle school pastoring. I do a little bit of MDing on Sunday mornings, of helping lead some the music side of worship leading, and so I love music as well. So I do a lot of different things, but the main stuff that keeps my days busy and full is creating content. So creating graphics, shooting videos, doing social media content, creating elements for our gatherings, and then helping resource and share with other churches. I started a website to be able to share all of that content called churchmediadrop.com, and it is 100% free. Every piece of content on the site is free, and we have tens of thousands of churches that have gotten free content from the site. And the goal, again, is just to resource the local church with high-quality media to help share the good news of Jesus, because that's what it's all about. We're not in competition with each other. We're all on the same team, even though it feels often like we're in competition with each other, but we're all on the same team. And so I just wanted to help that process. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was meeting Brad, and he was mentioning he just gave us the tip of the iceberg of things that he does. So we went like 2 or 3 levels deep, but apparently the stuff that Brad does goes way deeper, and he's a very busy man. So we carved out some time to chat with you, and I really appreciate it. And of course, the reason why we're here is to talk about AI.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those things where knowing that you are the boots on the ground, you are a creative director, you are working in the church day in, day out, and this AI thing came along. So I would love for you just to share, tell us about your journey with AI, how you got started, and you just, how was your AI journey?
For sure. So it actually started after SALT conference 2 years ago. I was on a flight home. I had taught on, I don't know, some other stuff, nothing that had to do with AI. And on the flight home from that conference, I distinctly remember being sat next to what I would call a crypto bro, somebody who is super into cryptocurrencies and all these future technologies. He talked my ear off about NFTs and VR and all of these future forward technologies. And he was all in on, especially on VR. He's like, VR is going to be the future. That's how we're going to take in all our content. And I was like, maybe, I don't know. Like, I think AR is pretty awesome, to being able to point your phone at something and see if IKEA sofa fits into your living room. That's pretty rad. That's a very cool use of technology. And I can see my dad using that just as well as my kids. I could never see my dad wearing a VR headset. And I don't really want to wear a VR headset all day long until they look like my glasses. So until that day, and so we're having this conversation about all these different things and whatnot. But at no point did AI come up in that. And that was in November of 2 years ago, drawing a blank. Anyway, 18 months ago or so. And then shortly after the new year, I started to hear about ChatGPT. And that's when the first version 3 kind of ChatGPT hit the streets and really was the first public thing about AI. And also DALL-E was the first time. And you started seeing these really weird images of spacemen on on horses, was kind of that first image that was getting passed around a lot. And I was like, this is mind-blowing and fascinating. I had no idea that the technology was even moving in that direction that fast, and knew that it was a thing maybe someday in the future, but didn't realize that it was that close. So I started looking into it more, and then I started seeing people posting There's new apps that were coming out that could do I'll take your photo and make you look like you're from 20 different movies, and started seeing some of these uses, but they all felt like gimmicks. And I was like, I don't know if this is really much of anything. And then I heard about Midjourney and started to take a look at Midjourney and DALL-E 3 or DALL-E 2 at the time. And DALL-E 2, let's just be honest, was not great. It was okay. It did some work, but no one would ever say that is a realistic image. However, when I found Midjourney, I started to see some images that were like, this is actually kind of usable. And then I was like, but this isn't usable because the resolution of this image is so small. So then I was like, okay, how do I find out more information on how to actually have this resolution be high enough that I could put this on a screen or print this or whatever? And that was where I first started diving in. And so one of my first designs that used AI was for Easter of 2023. Yeah, Easter of 2023. And since then, basically for the last 18, 20 months now, every single design project that I've done has some form of AI, generative AI in it. Whether it was pre-production that was done using my best assistant, ChatGPT, or if it is creating content with Midjourney, or if it's doing audio work with ElevenLabs, or any of the other amazing tools that are out there. And really my journey really went full tilt in because I have a wife who hates post-apocalyptic shows and movies. She hates the thought of the world's over and we have to figure out how to survive. That is not a fun, I love the interesting world building of all of that, but she's not such a huge fan. And AI, I started to get all of this pushback of AI is going to steal our jobs and is going to ruin everything and our kids aren't going to be educated. And I was like, what do I think about this? Well, I don't even know how these tools work. So I started doing a lot of investigation. I have 4 kids and I was like, okay, how is this going to affect their education? How is this going to affect my job? How can I utilize this for my job? And I'll just say my overarching idea on all of that, after being in the trenches doing it week after week and working with other people who are doing it, is that AI is a tool. And we can choose to use that tool or not use the tool. My favorite way to talk about it is as a calculator. Somebody was sharing about AI and they said, in schools, we didn't stop teaching math because we had a calculator. The math got harder, but we continued to teach math. And because we have AI, it doesn't mean that we stop creating. It doesn't mean we stop doing. It just means what we can do becomes not necessarily harder, but becomes better or more complex, or the sky becomes more limitless because tools and features are available to us that we've never had the availability before. So there's a bunch of different scenarios that I could go off on, but that's kind of the beginning of all of that.
Yeah. And that's awesome. And it's interesting because it was just recently, the Pope just spoke at the G7 summit a few days ago and basically said what you just said regarding AI, talking about it is a tool and it is something that can be used with care, right. And we must be purposeful in what we do with it moving forward. Good job aligning your views with, you and the Pope are on the same pathway there. Yeah. So good job there. Hey, so I would love, let's take it a little, let's go practical. Cause you mentioned a whole bunch of things that you do currently. And so I'd say, let's move into what you currently do in a week where AI is involved. And so maybe let's ask the question, what are 5 to 7 ways that you might use AI in a 2-week period that people, because it's probably native to you, but somebody listening is like, oh, I did not know that is a way I, as a creative director, could be using AI on a regular basis. Right. I never even thought of that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I saw an article floating around, and I think the number one point was thinking that AI is more powerful than it actually is, or is maybe better than it actually is. So I think the one lie that I want to get out of the way at the very beginning, that I think a lot of people just maybe assume because of what they see, is that when you type in a prompt or speak in a prompt or whatever, when you're interacting with some sort of generative AI, that you're going to get exactly what you want the first time. And that is not true. It is just not true. And going in thinking that you're going to get what you want the first time is going to make you think that all of this is fake, or that you need some sort of crazy doctoral understanding of how a large language model works to be able to utilize it. And the reason I bring that up is just so that people have a better understanding of what they're getting into when they start using it. So I'll kind of detail out like a sermon series or an event process that I go through now. And it's worked pretty well for me, but I want to point out the places where things take more than one try. So for me, my like design process, somebody brings me, like says, hey, we have a new series coming up, or Christmas or Easter, or we're doing a big event for this thing we need a graphic for, or we need a video or whatever. So the first thing that I do is I go to my favorite working teammate, which is a large language model. So large language models are ChatGPT, Claude, Llama from Meta, there's Gemini 1.5 from Google. All of those are large language models, right? And so I go to one of those. And I'll give a shout out to Dustin for running Magi, which is an awesome tool that brings in basically all of those into like one place for one price, which is a pretty awesome thing. So if you're looking to dip your toes in and you want to like try out a bunch of different things instead of having 12 different subscriptions, I'd start there and just try it out. You might find there's some other things, but yeah.
On that note, good timing, because I actually just interviewed Dustin.
Oh, perfect.
So for those of you who listened to our previous podcast, double shout out for Dustin and Magi.
Yeah, so Magi is pretty awesome. So you can go in there, and I typically start with just like a simple prompt of like, I'm working on a graphic for this sermon series called whatever. I'd love some ideas of how I could visualize that. I don't say generate a graphic for me. I say help me brainstorm, and the reason that I say it's my favorite teammate is because I don't know if you've ever been in a scenario. I'm in a scenario where there's not a lot of people on my team who do what I do. I work on a church staff, and there's other people on the team, but a lot of them are like pastoral people, or they are, like a kids person, but there aren't other creatives on the team or people who do what I do. And so to be able to go to a large language model and just say, hey, like it knows basically all of what you know, plus more. It's never going to get annoyed by your questions. You can ask them at any time. You're going to get a response right away. Your brainstorming sessions aren't going to fizzle out because they don't have any more ideas. The only reason your brainstorming session with a large language model would fizzle out is because your questions kind of stink, right? And so I try to use that as my first step in brainstorming ideas. A lot of times I will take it to the next step and say, like, can you visualize one of those ideas for me, just to see what it would come up with? I did this recently for a series called Tripped Up, and it was about, the sin that so easily entangles us. And I said, can you give me some ideas? And actually, when I did it, I typed the word tripped wrong, and I put in tipped up, and it gave me a bunch of ideas for tipped. And the amazing thing about large language models is I don't have to re-explain. It's not like I have to do a new Google search. All I have to say is, sorry, I actually meant tripped up. Can you give me an answer for that? And then it gave me an answer. I didn't have to redo the question. I just had to fix my spelling and tell it that I spelled it wrong. And then it gave me a bunch of ideas. And I said, cool, can I check out, can you visualize one of these for me? And the idea was like a front view of two sneakers, and all of the shoelaces were all tangled together, and some like legs. And then it tried to write tripped up, but it did a terrible job at it because AI and text is still not quite there. You can get it sometimes. But it visualized it, and I really liked the idea. And one of the cool things in ChatGPT is you can go through and you can you can find the prompt that it used to create that image. And so I went and grabbed that prompt and I brought it over to Midjourney, because I think Midjourney's quality is the best, without like making your own tools and being, going way down the rabbit hole. It's one of the best ones out there. And so I threw the prompt in there and started generating images. And about maybe 200 to 400 generations later, I found one that I really liked. So I spent hours generating images until I got one that I liked. And then I brought that into Photoshop and turned it into my final design.
So the two things that which you've already highlighted one of them, but I love the idea that you saying you start with brainstorming. So start one is when you begin, Monday morning and you're beginning your thing, open up your large language model. And the second thing, which you said, I think that we can't iterate enough, or we can't reiterate enough, is the idea that don't write one prompt, get one response, and then determine that AI is either useful or unuseful for all eternity based on that one response or image. And that's one of those things, especially with images. It's I've worked on prompts where I like get a response. I'm like, oh, I have to go back and change one word, get a response. Ooh, go back, change a second word, or tell it, oh, remember this thing, and you have to keep iterating on your prompt for images and for AI, for word generation.
Absolutely. And I think when people, for me, I basically changed the process out. Prior to this, the process was go to a free image site, because I don't have a big budget. I don't have a budget to be able to, buy graphics for every series, and I give away content. So I need to make sure everything is, easily that I can give it away for free. And so I would go search a site like unsplash.com or pexels.com and go look for high quality images. But basically I traded my searching for a few hours for a good image and trying to find good content for generating what I want and getting exactly what I want. So I haven't cut my time down at all. If anything, I might have increased my time some by using AI, but the quality of the content that I'm creating has also increased. And so,
I want to add one more thought, that something you mentioned that we get in our Facebook group, the question pops up now and again, and it pops up, just emails, all kinds of stuff. So you mentioned you open up and start brainstorming and put in your prompt. People ask quite often, what about the non-Christian bias of AI? Sure. And it's scary and it hates Christians. And it's something that we try to address on this podcast all the time. But I want you to share, your thoughts about that, because even saying, I just sit down and start brainstorming, and people say, oh, but are you getting Christian responses? Sure. And are those Christian responses good? It's just, one of those common questions we get, we try to answer. I'd love to have you address that as well.
Yeah. So the first thing is, if you're somebody who has seen a post floating around Facebook or social media, or you heard something from a friend or whatever about some sort of bias that they think they found, the first thing that you should do is go see it for yourself. Don't trust the meme. Don't ever trust the meme. Don't ever trust the Facebook post, whether it's got an image in it or not. Go do the research for yourself. Now, that takes a lot of time, takes critical thinking, but that is the only way for you to know. So I'll just be I don't want to get super political, but I will just share this real quick one. One that was floating around at the very beginning was this bias against conservatives and for liberals, or for Republicans versus Democrats. And it was the prompt was about writing a poem about Joe Biden and writing a poem about Donald Trump in ChatGPT. And people were like, you can't, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to test this out. So I went in and said, can you write me a poem about Joe Biden? And it spit out this poem about Sleepy Joe and blah, 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 blah. And then I said, can you write me a poem about Donald Trump? And I think it was in a new prompt. It might have been in the exact same one. And it said, sorry, I can't do any political content. We're not able to fulfill your request. That is a bias. That is 100% true. It was exactly what people said. Now, have they fixed that? Yes. Has that changed? Yes. But that was true in that case. So when I go in and I'm doing what I do, I'm looking for creative ideas. I am not looking for facts. So there are very different things. If you're looking for a large language model to be your spiritual leader, yes, you need to make sure it aligns with your spiritual values. But if you're looking for a large language model to maybe help brainstorm a worship set and passages of scripture that go with a song, you can, which I have done before. So you can go in and say like, hey, I want some songs about hope, modern worship songs about hope. And I would love some scripture passages that I can use to reference these songs that go along with it. It'll give you 10 answers really quickly of all of those things. And it will do, in my opinion, a really good job because I went and did the research afterwards. So it gave me that. I am not going to walk on stage and say, or go into a meeting and say, hey, here's this stuff and here's these passages, we should use them, without checking the work. We always have to check the work. And so I went and said, okay, what's this song about? What are the lyrics? And what's this passage about? And do they align? And yes, all of them did. So sure, there's for sure bias. I still think that image models have a very strong bias towards white individuals in them. Rob Lauder has pushed that is not necessarily as true as I think. And so that you can have differing opinions on that. I have found that if I don't prompt for ethnicity, my individuals that show up in my images are like 99% of the time white. And so, and that isn't necessarily somebody purposefully having a bias. That is a bias on the data that it was trained on. So if you go to iStock Photo or Getty Images or any of these places where image models are being trained, and you go look and go do a search for something on there, you'll probably see that like 90 to 99% of the people that show up in those images are white or look more white than they look less white and or Caucasian. And so the bias came from there in the photos that were taken that it was trained on. And this has gone the other direction. Google got in trouble because they were generating images, right? You've probably seen this one where they were generating historical images with a bunch of non-white people. And so you're getting Nazi officers that were black. And it's like, sorry, this never happened. You could dress up that way for Halloween if you really wanted to, but that's not going to happen in real life. So that's my take on the bias is it's more about the research side of things. And I don't personally run into it too much because I'm doing creative brainstorming and not necessarily factual searching.
Yeah. That's awesome. Let's try to do like rapid fire through a few more of like, so we have brainstorming and like you mentioned a few other things, like ElevenLabs, that kind of stuff. So give us some bullet points of like 5 more ways that, that a creative director may use AI in a 2-week period.
Yeah. So one that I use in a lot of videos is I use generative fill in Photoshop, which is a great way to do. It's the term is basically in painting. So if you're using any other image generator and you see the option for in painting, it's basically just generating something inside of an image that already exists. So you can do this in Photoshop. You can select anything. You say generative fill. And if you don't do anything in the prompt, for the most part, Photoshop's going to basically just try to remove whatever's there and give you what was behind it, is kind of the default behavior with no prompt, or it will extend an image. And so I use this on video shoots often. So I'll have a boom stand that, I got a mic that's down in the shot and you can see it there. And I go in and use generative fill to generate where that mic was and remove that. And so as long as there's nothing moving where that object is that I don't want, so like I have a guitar in the background of this shot. If I wanted to remove that guitar, I could use generative fill to remove it. I just need to make sure my hands never interact with that area. As long as they're not interacting, it's really easy to get rid of this. And this is a very old school technique called matte painting, where early days of film, they would like literally paint extra areas onto the frame to add these epic skies or, scenes or whatever. And you can do this in your video. So that's a really easy one using generative fill inside Photoshop. ElevenLabs is really crazy and super cool to create voiceovers. So you basically can speak in your script for a bumper video or for a social media thing or whatever in your own tone and pacing, and then you can have a new voice do that for you. Real quickly, I know we were trying to do rapid fire, but one really cool way that I use this is I went with my lead pastor to Ethiopia last summer to film interviews with our children that we do child sponsorship with, and people who had gotten micro loans through a program that we do with our partner. And we have a partner community where our church is the only church that partners with the community. So if we're not sharing their stories, nobody is. And so we went to capture those stories. I did interviews with mostly females, but I had a male Ethiopian interpreter with me. And I was getting audio of the person on camera, and then he was behind camera doing interpretation. And I went to start editing these videos, and I was like, I really wish I had a female to be able to share this. I had one other day with an Ethiopian woman, and I did a 5-minute video shoot with her that I literally only had 5 minutes of video with her, and she knew English and she shared whatever. I created a voice based on her voice. And so I was able to then write out at the time. They didn't have the voice to voice option with ElevenLabs when I did this. It was only text to voice, but I was able to write out a script and then have her voice share that script. All of the facts were true for it, but it was and had an Ethiopian accent. It was in a female's voice for a female on screen, and it was awesome. And her coworkers happened to be in our gathering in the US that day, the day that we shared it, and they had no idea that their coworker didn't do it, which is scary, but also awesome. Like the biggest win to be able to have, and I showed that video to people often, and they're like, I would have never known that was some sort of generated content. So that's another cool way that you can utilize that. ElevenLabs just released a whole sound effect suite, which I think is a really easy thing to be able to drop in some, drops into bumper videos or whatever, or just even atmospheric sounds of birds chirping or whatever to just take the environment of your video up a notch by using some of those things. So that's just a couple other ways that you can utilize it.
Cool. Yeah. Any other quick, uses? Because I love that. What you just said is awesome. So how about just one more?
Yeah. So I think the one that I honestly use the most that is not super obvious is I use Gigapixel from Topaz, which is an AI image upscaler. We talked about, or I mentioned this a little bit earlier about the quality of AI images, because of how diffusion models work and all this kind of stuff. Basically, there is a point where it's not worth having the original generation generate a higher quality. It's better to generate medium quality and then use AI to upscale that to a higher quality. And once I got Gigapixel, I realized I can use this for anything. It doesn't just have to be for AI images. So we had, life groups launching in the fall, and we wanted photos of all of the life group leaders for a directory. And all I got were really terrible, low quality Facebook profile photos from people. I don't understand how everybody has a smartphone in their pocket, and yet like all of their Facebook photos are like the worst quality, or people say like, we don't have any pictures of ourselves. I'm like, you carry a camera in your pocket every day. How do you not have a good picture of yourself? But I digress. So I had all of these subpar images. I just ran them through Gigapixel and upscaled them. And then I brought them into Photoshop and did like removal. So like one of them was like a woman at her kid's wedding. And it's like, well, I don't need to see you at your wedding. I just need you. And so I took out every family member and upscaled it. And I had this really nice photo of her that I could use for our directory. So that's just another way to use that. Gigapixel is awesome too, because it's not a subscription. So you pay like a flat fee and you get updates for a year, and then you own whatever you have after that year. And if you want more updates, you just pay for it again. It's a maintenance contract.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Those are all awesome. I really appreciate, your practical ideas. And that's the thing is I think people are listening to this that are creative directors, and they're like, I'm going to try those things. So I think it's really cool. As we kind of, close down our chat here, what is it you are excited about that is going, like, what is it you're waiting for? What AI thing, or like you're waiting for this to be fixed, or this AI to be able to do this in your job right now?
So there's a couple things. One, I just got a better tool for, and let me see if I can. Yeah. So I don't know if you've heard of Recraft.ai. If that one, is that familiar to you?
No.
So Recraft is an AI tool. So it's just Recraft.ai. And the one thing that I found from them from a recent project is they have a vectorizing option. So you can generate vectors in there, which you can also do in Illustrator, but generating vectors is not vector images, if you're not familiar with them, which are what logos are made out of and are endlessly scalable. So you don't have to worry about resolution and all of this. So vectors are kind of pretty far behind images right now, but you can generate them in Illustrator, and Recraft does generations, but you can also do vectorization of images that look like vectors, and then you can work with them. And Recrafts does an incredible job because it doesn't just generate shapes. It tries to figure out like, well, was that shape, even though it's covered, like if there's a circle in the background and then there's a bunch of elements on top of it, it wouldn't just do the pieces of the circle. It does a true circle underneath all of the other pieces. So it does a very good job with it. If you're a graphic designer, you know that that's really helpful. So I'm waiting for generative vector work to get even better, because I think for generating logos and things like that, it will be really, really helpful to have that be better. The next one that I'm waiting for is generative images that are layered. I think this has to be pretty high on Adobe's roadmap to figure out how to do separation of elements in a generation. So you could basically generate a Photoshop file where all of the pieces, so if you have a character and a background, that it would give you a background layer and a character layer, and they would work together and you could move the character around. And so I'm waiting for that one to happen. And then video. Video is this big looming, amazing party and storm at the same time, because as we know, the amount of disinformation that is out there these days, we're basically living in the disinformation era right now. And when video becomes really high quality, it's going to get even harder. Right now, generative video is just not, it's getting closer. There's some cool things that have been coming out, but it's getting closer. I am waiting for 30 seconds of generative video at like 720p quality is all I would want, because then we can use upscalers to make it longer. I'm waiting for that day so I can start generating worship backgrounds. And so I can start creating, the Apple TV drone flyovers that you have that I love those nature flyovers. But there's only a certain amount of shots and a certain amount of nature left on Earth that's worth, or that you can get good shots of, or that you have the rights to fly a drone over. And so when we can start doing drone flyovers of made up environments that look realistic, it'll be incredible. And so I'm really waiting for that day the most out of all of them, but those are probably the top three things.
it made me think of it just recently in our AI for Church Facebook group. Rob Lauder was sharing a video that he recently created. And the reason I mentioned it to you and in this moment, because it was this, kind of ambiance video that, that just kind of with a person speaking over it. But it was interesting because the first thing I thought of when I watched this video, this calm, manly voice with these, raccoons walking around, it made me think of the old Pure Michigan commercials where I hear them on the radio. Yep. I would hear them on the radio. I see them on TV. It's, it's like
we do have a good advertising board in Michigan. I think they do a pretty decent job.
Yeah, I agree. It's like when the day's work needs a break and the music is like do 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 do, and you just need to get away to the nature. And it's like Pure Michigan. And I was like, that's exactly what Rob made. Just all he needed was the Pure Michigan thing at the end. And so that's where in one, let's say it took him, 5 hours, 4 hours, whatever it took him to make that. He did make something that I would say it's not the same quality, but like it's like 65%.
And the only thing that's holding it back is the quality of the imagery, not his editing skills, not the audio, and not the voiceover. All of those things are totally fine. If anything, what's holding it back is that the clip length of video is pretty standardized to about 4 to 5 seconds. And so most AI videos you watch are these cuts between 2 and 5 seconds, every 2 and 5 seconds. So there's no long shots of anything. And which is why Sora is like everybody's waiting for Sora. Who knows if it'll ever come, honestly. But because that can do a lot longer shots, but really it's just the actual quality of the video, not necessarily the shot. Like the framing of the shots are great. Even the motion of what the camera is doing in the shots is really nice. It's really just like, can we just get the quality a little bit higher? And it's just going to take a little bit of time, but AI moves very fast. So a little bit of time in AI is like a few months, not multiple years.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, it's been a great conversation. As we're closing this down, if people wanted to find you or stuff you're working on, is there anything you want to share about, where to find you and stuff you're working on right now?
Yeah. So if you want to download any of the AI generated content that I've been creating or a bunch of other content, you can check out churchmediadrop.com. And basically probably the latest, 10 to 20 things you'll see there in the newest drops on the site. Those are all built with AI, with the assistance of AI. And they have fully layered Photoshop files, so you can pick them apart and see what I'm doing and see how simple some might be and how complex some others might be. So you can find that there. And then you can find me on Instagram and Facebook, brad.zimmer.mn. So brad.zimmer.mn. And then my email is just brad@zimmer.mn. So if your church, if you're looking for help with any of this stuff, I'd love to come alongside your church and help your church out.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Brad. Thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.